We're glad you decided to check out this message by Seabreeze Church and hope that you benefit from it. We also hope that you would join us either online or in person on a Sunday. We have a 9 o'clock live streamed service online, and then we have in-person services on our campus at 9 and 10:30. So again, we hope that you would join us, and we hope that you enjoy this message.
Morning, everyone. Good to be with you today. We are in the middle of a series, as Elliot said. We're working our way through the New Testament book of 2 Corinthians. Now, this book was written by the Apostle Paul to a church he had started in the city of Corinth, which is now modern-day Greece. And here's an artist rendering of what they think this city might have looked like when this church was started about 50 AD. It's a relatively new city. If you look at this, it's like, man, I'd like to move there. That looks like a great place. So while this church was getting started, the city of Jerusalem was going through a famine. They were in their 5th year of a severe famine at this time. And so this new church in Corinth heard about the struggles of the church in Jerusalem, and they decided to give to that need. They decided to be generous. But for some reason, their stated intention didn't turn into reality. Nothing really came of this gift. And so now in 2 Corinthians, the second letter written by Paul to this church, in the 2 chapters we're going to look at today, chapters 8 and 9, Paul addresses this intention to be generous that they had stated. And he basically says, while they are waiting to be generous, God is also waiting. And that's because God often waits for us to start giving before he starts moving and acting in some pretty significant ways. Now, the theme of this message series is called Power in Weakness. We're looking at how God uses the seemingly weak and often overlooked things to display his power and accomplish much more than we could have imagined. And generosity is one of those underrated sources of great power. And I think we're all well aware of the power of the US dollar. If you've got enough of these, you can accomplish some pretty amazing things in life. So we know the power that is resident in accumulating dollars, but we tend to not be aware of the even greater power that is unleashed when we give money, when we give dollars. And these 2 chapters, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, describe the chain reactions, really, that giving begins to initiate. That's kind of what happens when we tip over the first domino in a line of dominoes. Now, we've all done this, probably did this as a kid. I wish I had more time to do this. And you've probably seen some of those amazing displays where kind of like whole, tables or rooms are turned into elaborate designs, and you push over one domino and then the whole thing sweeps over. I was going to show you a video of that, but I found a video that I think is even a little bit more interesting. I wasn't really aware of this. It turns out the domino effect not only occurs in the number of dominoes that you can line up, but it also can be determined in the size of the domino. So I want to show you this quick video, and then we'll continue on. So watch this.
And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes. And the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than a meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
So maybe you knew that, but I wasn't aware of that. So the domino effect actually has a definition. Here's the definition. It's the accumulative effect that is produced when one event sets off a chain reaction. That's what we do when we line up dominoes. So generosity works like that. It's like the first domino of a chain reaction that really goes on into eternity. And so in these 2 chapters of 2 Corinthians, chapters 8 and 9, Paul identifies 3 dominoes of generosity. Now, it's not 3 different kinds of gifts. It's really how one gift kind of sets off a chain reaction that goes in 3 different directions. One gift branches out into three powerful kinds of impact. And that's what he talks about in these two chapters, and so that's what we're going to look at. The first chain reaction is the harvest domino. This is the first kind of effect that giving has. When we give, it has the power to multiply the impact of our lives and that gift far beyond what we could have done alone or what even that gift can accomplish all by itself. Now, each of these dominoes, we're going to look at three of them, each of these chain reactions comes with an image to help you remember what they are. The image of this is planting a seed. So if you have a dollar in your hand, you can do a lot of different things with this dollar. But it's not just a dollar. It's also a seed that if you give this dollar, it turns into a seed that you plant in the ground, and its impact, its effect, is multiplied over time. This is stated in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 6. Here's what it says. Remember this, whoever sows, speaking of sowing seed, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. So that's the harvest domino, the principle of the harvest. Now, the reason most people are not that generous is because they're afraid to part with the money that they have. And the reason is pretty reasonable. If you part with the money that you have, what if you end up needing that money in the future? The famine that had affected the city of Jerusalem, it created this desire to help, but it also created this fear of, this could happen to us. We could find ourselves in need. So if we give to that need, what if the famine spreads and it begins to affect us? And it turns out the very money we gave, we're going to need that money. And that's one of the big reasons people hold on rather than be generous. So their impulse was to hold. And the same is true for us, because even though we're in a modern economy, the future is still very uncertain for us. I mean, how much money will you need in the future? It's really hard to know. Well, I think most of us would say, I'd feel better with more as I move into the future than with less. But it turns out there's only one thing that money can do in the future that is guaranteed. You don't know how much you're going to need in the future. There's only one thing money can guarantee in the future, and that is that if you give it, it will not only bless you, but it will multiply in blessings to other people. So an act of generosity is never isolated. You give to something, but that's just the beginning. That's not the end of that gift. It starts a cascade of future blessings. Now, it's really the truth that every farmer knows, and that's the truth behind this image. The farmer has seed, and with that seed, he can do three things. These three images identify the three things that a farmer can do with the seed that he has. First of all, he can grind it up into flour. This is the flour processor that you can use seed, grind it into flour, and make it into food that you can use to feed your family. That's the first thing the farmer can do with seed. The second thing he can do is store it in a silo that looks like this. Or the third thing he can do is he can plant that seed in the ground and watch it become a harvest, a field of seeds that one seed can produce 10 or 20 or 50 other seeds depending on what kind of seed it is. Now, a farmer, of course, can't just specialize in one. A farmer needs to do all three with the seed that he has. And for the winter, he's got to store seed and for the future when there is no harvest. But if he never plants anything, he doesn't get to be a farmer for very long, because there's nothing to harvest if you don't plant anything. So with what God has given us, we need to do the same three kinds of things also. Our decisions about what we do with the money we have is really driven by how we rank these three. And this is the usual order of priority. If you don't think about, what God wants you to do with your money, if you are intentional beyond your natural inclinations, this is the order, especially in our culture, that it falls. The first order of priority is spending. We take the seed that we've got, we turn it into something that we consume, whether it's food or other things that we need. Now, this makes sense because most of the money that most people have goes into just supporting life, in buying food and paying rent or mortgage. And in this particular economy, 68% of our economy is based on consumer spending. And so, even in this nation, many people will not only consume all the seed that they have, but the data shows that lots of people, having consumed all the seed they have, they will then borrow more seed and consume that seed. They'll go into debt because of how much they're spending. So that's the first order of priority for most people. The second order then is save. If you have a budget, if you have a plan, if you're preparing for retirement or something in the future, then you will save. And if you stick to your budget, then you're able to save. You're able to reduce your spending, leave enough left over so you can begin to store some things for the future, which is a wise thing to do. And then the third priority is give. So what that means is if there's anything left after you've spent what you've spent and saved what you've saved, then if you feel like it, you will give. And this is why in our nation, it's estimated that about 1 to 1.5% of our income goes into giving. This is why it's the smallest portion, because it's usually the last on our priority. If after we have done the first two, anything left over, then we'll do the last. But God says you need to reverse the order. The giving needs to move from the back of the line to the front of the line. You need to make that your top priority. It's not the most of what you spend, but it's the first thing that you spend, the first thing rather that you do with your money. You make the giving decision first, and then with what's left over, you spend and you save. Now, why would we reverse the order? Let's explain to us why this is a wise thing to do in a couple of verses after the one I just read in verse 10 of 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It says, now he who supplies seed, speaking of God, the one who supplies seed to the sower, and bread for food, will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. So who is the he who supplies seed again? Well, it's speaking of God here. We tend to think that we earn all the seed that we have. And it's understandable because we're the ones that go to work. We're the ones that start the businesses. It's our name that's on our paychecks. And so we think that we are the ones that are solely in charge of producing the income that we currently have. And it's true that if we don't go to work, if we don't put in effort, if we don't apply our minds, then we're probably not going to earn anything. But the bigger truth is that if God stopped supplying the opportunities and the mind and the context in which we are earning our income, if God turned the spigot off of his supply, instantly we would stop earning. We would stop having what we have. So God is the one who supplies the seed. He's the one who's in charge of the supply chain. As elaborate as our supply chain is, God is over that supply chain. And so who does God supply more seed to, according to this verse? The one who sows. He supplies seed to the sower, not the one who stores. He doesn't supply seed to the storer. He doesn't supply seed to the consumer. He supplies seed to the one who sows it, who gives it. And that's because when we give, this verse says God does three things. The first thing he does is God supplies more. There's no guarantee that he's going to take whatever you've given and replace it. I've seen that happen in my life and all kinds of other people's lives, but there's no guarantee that it's a dollar for dollar exchange. What God is saying is that if you decide to give, then I'm going to get more involved in helping supply even more. If you don't, then I'm not going to get as involved. I'm going to supply more if you sow that seed. The second thing he says is going to happen is not only am I going to supply, I'm going to actually increase the store of your seed. I'm going to give you more than what you need. Now, the timing on this, the amount on this, there's no guarantees. This is a principle that how God works. You decide to give in the way he wants you to give. He's going to help with your supply chain needs, and then he's actually going to supply more than just what you need. And then the third thing he's going to do is he will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. He's talking about what's going to happen with that seed. You plant that seed, you put that dollar in the ground, and you give it to me in the way that I tell you to give it. And what's going to happen from that seed is not just nice things, but people's lives are going to be changed. There are going to be more and more people who will decide to follow me and do what is right. That's what the word righteous means. And the harvest of changed lives is going to multiply over time. Because one life is changed, and that life changes 3 or 5 or 10 more lives, and that life changes 20 or 30 more lives. And it's the harvest principle. I will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. God will turn the dollars into changed lives. So the question then is, how do we make giving a priority? How do we make it a top priority so that we give first, and then we spend, and then we save? The only way to do that is you tithe. You give 10%. That's what the word tithe means. You give 10% of your income. In the Bible, God tells us to give 10% of everything that he supplies. When we do that, then everything else occurs after that. We then spend with the 90% and save with what's left over after that. Now, we can intend to be generous, just like the Corinthian church did, but until we decide to actually tithe, it's not really a priority. It's a preference, it's an intention, it's a desire, but it's a priority, according to the Bible, when we decide to give a tithe, 10% of the income that God gives us. So that's the harvest domino. The second domino is the joy domino. The joy domino. When we give, it has the power not only to set off a chain reaction of changed lives on into eternity, it has the power to start a chain reaction of joy in our lives and then into the lives of other people. The image for this domino is drilling a well. Drilling a well. So it turns out that if you're holding $1, you're not just holding $1. This is kind of like a drill bit, that if you give it, it kind of starts drilling into your heart. I mean, one of the things about our heart is that it's very hard to change a heart because it's very hard to access us at heart level. We have layers of protection around our heart. But money has a direct access to our heart. I mean, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable already, that's indication that we're talking about heart things. You know, we're dealing with who we really are and what we really think. So we're holding something that can drill into our heart and access our heart. 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 2 says this, "And now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches." So he's writing to the Corinthian church. He's talking about some other churches that also gave to the need of the church in Jerusalem. Out of their most severe trial, these Macedonian churches, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up, that's that well image, welled up rich generosity. What Paul is saying is, let me tell you about some other churches that decided to get involved and help with this need in Jerusalem. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. They were facing severe trial. And this was often true of the early churches, because early churches were under extreme persecution. Many times they were scrambling for their life. So you would expect that in that context, people just aren't going to get around to being generous because they're under extreme trial. Not only that, they were facing extreme poverty. Extreme poverty is not just, I can't pay the mortgage this month, or I'm a little tight. Extreme poverty means you're probably struggling to feed yourself. You probably don't have enough food to eat. But out of this group, facing extreme trial, or severe trial and extreme poverty, out of this group welled up two things that you normally don't see true of people that are very poor and under extreme trial. The two things were overflowing joy and rich generosity. That's what came out of these churches in Macedonia. So what lingered long after the gift had been given was this overflowing joy. The idea is that the well of giving hit the water table, it hit an aquifer, and it just bubbled up. Not only generosity, but all of this joy. Now, it doesn't appear that their trial got better. It doesn't appear that their financial situation got better. So where did the joy come from? It came from God. Generosity is like a well. It taps into the aquifer of God's joy. It's kind of like drilling a well in a desert, like this well right here. It doesn't matter how bad things are in your life. I mean, your whole life may be just a desert landscape of disaster and things not working out the way you want it to. It doesn't matter how bad things are on the outside, on the surface of your life. When you give, you get access to the water table of God's joy. Giving generates a smile on the heart of God that we feel. It resonates in our own souls. But there are two conditions that are required for a well to access water, and the same thing is true for this well of joy. If you're going to dig a well, it has to be in the right place, and it has to be deep enough. It has to be deep enough. So these are the same two requirements in order for our hearts to access joy. First of all, right place. It has to be in the right place. In order to access the water table of God's joy, the giving must be to God's work. We have to give in the right place. Now, philanthropy is great, and it does bring a measure of happiness. But this is talking about overflowing joy from God. And for that to happen, we need to give directly to Him. But how do you give directly to God? We are told in this chapter, just a few verses later, 2 Corinthians 8, verse 5, it says, "And they," speaking of these Macedonian churches, "they did not do as we expected. They gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us in keeping with God's will." So the first thing is they gave themselves to God. What does that mean? What preceded the monetary gift was a giving of their hearts to God. That's why they gave. They were giving to God. So they weren't just giving to famine relief in Jerusalem. That was the purpose, ultimate purpose of the gift. But the bigger purpose was they were doing this out of obedience to God, out of understanding that God wanted them to do this. So they were giving this to God. And if we don't give our gifts to God first, then our hearts are not going to be in the right place to experience the chain reaction of joy. And your joy will be limited to maybe the visible impacts of your gift, the results of your gift. And if the results aren't what you think, or you don't like the results, then there will be no joy. But if you give to God, then the joy is present whether or not the gifts did what you thought they would or do or not. After my grandfather died, this was decades ago, my grandmother gave a large gift to her church. And they didn't have a lot of money, so this was a big sacrifice that she made after my grandfather died. And years later, I heard that they discovered that the church had misused some of those funds. And I thought, oh, my grandmother's going to be devastated. I mean, she's on a limited income. She's thinking, why did I give this money? This church didn't use it the way that they said they were going to use it. And I remember asking her about it at one point when I was visiting. And I could tell she was perturbed. She wasn't happy about it. But she said this. She said, really, it's okay because I gave that money to God. And therefore, I wished it had been used better. But my first gift, my first move in my heart was I gave it to God. Now, how do you give money to God? God doesn't have a bank account, so how and where do you give it to Him? Well, the second thing it says in this verse, they gave themselves first to God and then to us in keeping with God's will. This is what God intends. Who is us? Well, it's the Apostle Paul and the other leaders of the Macedonian church. So giving to God always shows up in giving to a specific local church. Which church? I mean, you just pick one of your favorite ones on TV and give to that? No, you give to the church that you're a part of. The church that you know by experience. The church that you have real reason to trust the leaders of that church. Just like it was with Paul. You give yourself to God, and then you give yourself to a specific church, and you trust the leaders of that church to use that gift to accomplish God's purpose. Now, I know, I'll just speak for myself. As the leader of this church, every gift that is given here is a sacred trust. I understand that. That money was given to God, and I will be held accountable to use those gifts to do His work. And I know that these gifts are a statement of trust. So to me, That's more precious than the gift itself, is the trust that's represented behind that gift. Now, sometimes when people move out of the area to another area, one of the things, not always, but one of the things sometimes people will say to me when they're saying, hey, I'm moving to South County, or I'm moving somewhere else, and they'll say, but I'm going to still keep giving to Seabreeze. And I'll say, I appreciate that, but you need to give where you're at. Whatever church you're going to be at next, that's where you need to give. You need to give where God is growing you. You need to give where God is teaching you. You need to give where you are serving. That's where you need to give. So that's the right place. The second condition of accessing the aquifer of God's joy when we give is you need to give for the right reason. So to access the water table of God's joy, our giving needs to be deep enough. In other words, it needs to break through the defensive, rock-like layers of our heart. Part of that occurs with the amount that we give. That's why God established the tithe. I mean, if you give 10%, I promise you, it will impact your heart. It will impact your heart. But even more important, I think, than the amount is the reason, the motive of your heart for giving. And that's addressed in 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So at first glance, it seems that this verse is saying, don't give until you're giddy about giving. I mean, till you feel like giving. Let the emotions of your heart guide you in your giving. Don't give reluctantly, just because you feel bad. Don't give under compulsion, just because you feel pressure to give. Give only when you're cheerful. So what does this mean? Should we just wait for a wave of generous emotions to roll over us? Well, if I waited, it wasn't going to happen. The Greek word, which the New Testament is written in, for cheerful means literally the readiness of mind to do good. That's what the word means. That's why it says you need to give what you have decided, that's the key word, decided in your heart to give, not feel in your heart to give. So what it's saying is come to a clear decision about what you want to give, what God's leading you to give, and don't let your emotions lead you as you move forward. Because emotional giving will lead your heart rather than decide and let your emotions grow. I mean, a good example of this for me is marriage. When I married my wife, there were plenty of emotions. I really wanted to. I wasn't forced to. I wasn't, reluctantly, I got to marry somebody. Might as well marry her. No, I really wanted to marry her. There was emotions involved. But more important than my emotion was a decision that I made to direct my heart towards her. As I said, I didn't do it reluctantly. I wanted to. And I decided that she would become my greatest treasure here on earth. So did my emotions fully cooperate with that decision? Has it been just one giddy, joyful day after another for 38 plus years? No, there's been great times, but there's been really hard times too. And it's in those times where I've had to ignore how cheerful I feel. And I've had to look back on what I decided in my heart to do. And as I do that, then my emotions eventually come around. But if I let my emotions lead, I won't give my life to her in the way that God wants me to. And it's the same thing with our money. So we need to decide. So that's the joy domino. So the harvest domino, the joy domino, lastly, the grace domino. When we give, it has the power to start a chain reaction of God's grace. The image for this is a set of water pipelines that's used to irrigate the fields. So again, when you're holding a dollar, you're not just holding a dollar. If you give it, you're holding really a pipeline of God's grace into the future and beyond just your life. This is what it says about this in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 7. But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. So here's a list of efforts that we need to excel in. The Greek word means that you keep topping yourself. You keep growing in these areas. And it makes sense for all of these. I mean, do you ever have enough faith? Are you ever at the point where you say, you know what, I just can't trust God anymore? No, you need to keep growing in that. How about your words? Do you ever find yourself thinking, I should have said that better? Yes. Knowledge, yes. Earnestment, effort, your effort on life, love for people. All of these, you have to keep topping yourself. We need to keep growing. And what it's saying is be sure that you don't forget to add giving to this list. Why? Well, it's called the grace of giving. Grace is receiving God's help. So literally what this is saying is I want you to excel in this receiving of giving. Well, which is it, receiving or giving? It's both. It's a reciprocal relationship. And the reason is because God's grace is a pass-through power. What I mean by that is we receive it so that we might give it, so that we might receive more, so that we might give more, so that we might receive even more, so that we might give more. That's this receiving of giving. Receiving and giving are linked. So generosity is not so much a decision about how much am I going to give, how much am I going to part with. It's really a decision about how much do I want God to pass through my hands over my lifetime. Now, a harvest of righteousness that we talked about in the first, set of dominoes is great. It's amazing to think of how our lives can impact other lives through our giving. And who wouldn't want more joy in their life? That was the second set of dominoes. But here's the truth. You can't eat righteousness, and the bank will not take joy as a payment on your mortgage. You need money. And if you're generous, you're going to have less of it. So the concern is answered. This concern is answered right after the verse about being a cheerful giver. Why would you risk giving? Here's the answer. Verse 8 of chapter 9. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. So do you have enough to be generous? Maybe. But a lot of people don't. Does God have enough for you to be generous? Well, then yes, he does. Notice the quantity words in this verse. All grace abound to you. God just doesn't have a little help, a little grace left over to help you. He has all grace. So that in all things, at all times, there's no topic, there's no moment beyond the reach of God's help. Having all that you need. God's grace doesn't just help you get your nose a little bit above water or help you with a few needs. He helps us with every need. Why does God dispense so much help, so much grace? So that we might be able to abound in every good work. And we think of generosity as being at the end of the money line. It's the last thing that we do. So we give what we can. That's the normal approach, as I mentioned before. But God flips the order and puts generosity at the beginning. Our generosity is a major factor that influences how much God decides to give to us. So God invites us to be a pipeline of his grace. And if the pipeline is closed off or it's clogged because we're not giving generously, then what does God do? He diverts his grace to a pipeline that is open, through which his grace can flow. So that's why I said earlier, God often waits for us to be generous before he decides to do more. Now here's the thing. We can all nod in agreement with this. It's like, yeah, that's right. That's the way it works. But what we actually do is going to determine the order of priority in our hearts. So we need to evaluate our own grace of giving. So here's a few questions as we wrap up. Question number 1, again, these just for you to evaluate for yourself. You do what you decide on this yourself. First of all, have you ever given a gift to God? In other words, have you ever given to a church? If you've never given a single gift to God, I would encourage you to do it. Just give one gift. That's your next step. Second question, maybe you've already given, but are you giving regularly? What I mean by that is there a plan to give to God regularly? Or is it more kind of an emotional thing? I've got a little extra, I feel bad, or I feel good, or in a mood, then you give. Well, for you, I would encourage you to come up with a plan. Decide, what am I going to give, and make a commitment to it. Third question, are you tithing? This is the point at which, from what I understand of the Bible and what I've seen and experienced, this is the point where God says, now you're being generous. Now generosity really is your top priority. So if you're not tithing, that's the next step that I would encourage you to consider. Start tithing. The last question, for those of us that are tithing, how can you keep topping yourself? This is a challenge. I mean, for me, I've been tithing for decades. And there are moments when it's been harder, but it's just a part of my life now. But I need to keep excelling in this grace of giving. So what can I do to grow my generosity? That would be a question for you. So in the words of Paul, see to it. Again, this is the Apostle Paul, the Holy Spirit inspired through the Bible. So these are the words of God. See to it that you excel in this grace of giving. Let's pray. Father, we look forward to the day when we see you, and I think from the perspective of heaven, we will see just how much grace you have supplied to us. And we'll get to see all of the pipelines of that grace through our gifts and all the people that were impacted. Right now, we see a little bit of it, but we don't get to see all of it. So I pray that you would help us to trust you in faith, to trust that as we give, you will supply, and you will increase our store of seed, and you will enlarge the harvest of our righteousness. Everyone is at a different place on this, and you know exactly where we all are. So I pray that you'd speak to us individually in this coming week about what you want us to do next in this important area. We pray this now in your name, Jesus. Amen.